In Taiwan, whispers of the supernatural often cling to old hospitals, abandoned wards, and forgotten asylums. But rarely do such stories unfold within the clean, well-lit walls of a dental clinic. Yet this is exactly where Xiao, a young receptionist fresh out of college, found herself entangled in a mystery that would forever haunt her. When she first joined the clinic in Taipei, nothing seemed unusual. The dentists were friendly, the pace was manageable, and the atmosphere felt more like spending the day with friends than working a job. Hidden beneath the building, however, was a private basement meant only for staff, a lounge with a soft couch, a television, and a small statue of the thousand-armed Guan Yin placed beside the cabinet. To Xiao, it was a comforting space, a quiet retreat from the bustle upstairs. But within those walls, something restless was waiting, and soon it would make itself known. The clinic had always felt unusually welcoming, almost too good to be true. For Xiao and her friend Ling, it had become more than just a workplace. It was like a second home where laughter echoed through quiet afternoons, and the stresses of city life never seemed to intrude. Yet, as is often the case with places that appear perfect on the surface, something darker lingered beneath the calm exterior. The first cracks in that illusion appeared one quiet evening, when Ling was left to close the clinic on her own. The night began like any other. She lowered the metal shutters halfway across the glass front doors, locked them securely, and then made her way downstairs to the basement lounge. It was her little ritual whenever she was the last one there, waiting comfortably for her boyfriend to arrive instead of standing outside under the dim streetlights. She turned on the TV, curled herself onto the couch, and tried to let the hum of the news anchor's voice fill the silence of the room. But silence has a way of amplifying what lies beneath it. A few minutes later, the sound came, an abrupt, violent banging against the metal gate above her. The noise was so sharp, so aggressive, that Ling leapt up in shock. Her heart thudded against her chest as she sprinted upstairs, fumbling to unlock the door and lift the shutter. The street outside lay empty. Only the faint shuffle of distant footsteps and the flicker of neon lights from a convenience store next door reminded her she wasn't entirely alone. But no one was there. No pranksters, no late-night visitors, nothing. Trying to brush it off, Ling locked the gate again and returned downstairs. Yet the moment she stepped back into the lounge, a chill prickled her skin. Something had changed. The room was darker. The TV, which she swore she'd left on, was now off. She froze, staring at the blank screen, convinced she had not touched the remote. Perhaps she had brushed it accidentally in her rush, she thought. But the unease settled like a weight on her chest. She tried to convince herself it was nothing. But as she reached for the remote, the lights snapped off with a loud, distinct click. Not a flicker, not a power surge, just the unmistakable sound of a switch being flipped. The basement plunged into complete darkness. Ling's breath caught in her throat. She knew that sound. She had heard it countless times, that crisp pop of the switch. Someone had turned it off. Terrified, she bolted. She didn't stop to gather her belongings, didn't dare look over her shoulder. She tore through the clinic and into the night, rushing straight into the brightly lit convenience store next door. Her hands trembled as she dialed Xiao's number. When her friend picked up, Ling barely got the words out, describing the banging on the gate, the dead TV, the sudden darkness. Xiao, amused at first, teased her for being a scaredy cat, but promised to come over since she was nearby. Minutes later, Xiao arrived, laughing as she hugged her frightened friend. But Ling's pale face and trembling voice told her this wasn't just a silly scare. Before Ling left with her boyfriend, Xiao offered to finish locking up the place. That's when she noticed the smell, sharp, pungent, a foul stench that seemed to cling to her throat. Following the odor down the stairs, she froze. On the second step lay a bloated, decaying rat, its body curled stiff, its fur stretched taut. It looked like it had been there for days, yet Ling had been in and out all day and noticed nothing. Xiao quickly disposed of it, but the unease lingered. Something about the timing, the smell, and the sudden appearance of the corpse unsettled her more than she cared to admit. That night, both women went home with the thought that perhaps the basement wasn't as harmless as they had once believed. If Ling's night had been strange, Xiao's would soon become worse. A few days later, she found herself working the reception desk alone near closing time. The clinic was quiet, only the faint hum of the air conditioner keeping her company. She was counting the day's cash, preparing to lock it into the safe, when suddenly the lights flickered and went out. This time it wasn't just the basement, it was the entire clinic. The sudden darkness startled her so badly she dropped the stack of bills, the notes scattering across the floor. A wave of panic rose in her chest. Instinctively, she reached for the switch, but then hesitated. That money wasn't hers. If even a single bill went missing, she'd have to answer for it. Forcing herself to stay calm, she knelt down and began sweeping her hands across the tiled floor, trying to gather the scattered cash. But the floor was bare. Her palms brushed every inch of the space in front of her, but the bills were gone. Confusion sharpened into fear. The money couldn't just disappear. She scrambled to her feet and darted toward the light switch. Just like Ling had heard, she recognized the crisp, mechanical click. It had been turned off, not tripped by a power surge. She flipped it back, and the clinic was instantly bathed in harsh fluorescent light. Heart pounding, Xiao rushed back to the counter to retrieve the missing bills. Her breath caught in her throat. There, in the center of the safe, already stacked neatly, lay the entire day's earnings. The safe that she hadn't opened. The safe that should have been empty until she put the money inside. Xiao stood frozen, staring at the impossibility before her. The money hadn't been lost at all. It had been placed into the safe as if by invisible hands. Carefully, deliberately. A gesture that was almost mocking in its precision. Her thoughts raced. This was no accident of tired memory. She hadn't imagined the darkness, the scattered notes, or the sound of the switch. Just as Ling had experienced days before, something in the clinic was playing with them, toying with their sanity in ways that were subtle, yet deeply terrifying. Xiao closed the safe with trembling hands and forced herself to finish closing up for the night. Every shadow in the clinic seemed to lengthen as she moved. The creak of the floorboards, the flicker of the fluorescent lights, all of it felt more alive, more watchful. When she finally stepped into the cool night air, she exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. From that night on, both Xiao and Ling carried a quiet dread every time they stepped into the clinic. They exchanged nervous glances at the sound of creaking stairs or flickering lights. The basement, once a cozy lounge where they would eat lunch and laugh during breaks, had become a place they both tried to avoid. It was as though the walls themselves held their breath, waiting for the next opportunity to remind them that they were not alone. In the weeks that followed, the strange events would only grow in intensity, as if feeding on their fear. The banging on the gate, the sudden plunges into darkness, the appearance of the dead rat, the mysteriously vanished and reappearing money, these were not random coincidences. They were signals, warnings that something had rooted itself in the heart of the clinic. And the most unsettling thought of all was this: these weren't just accidents of bad wiring or overactive imaginations. They were deliberate, calculated. As Xiao lay awake at night, the memory of that neatly stacked pile of cash haunted her. Whoever, or whatever, was there in the clinic wasn't merely trying to frighten them. It was sending a message, one she wasn't yet ready to understand. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the clinic, their little sanctuary, was slowly being claimed by something they could neither see nor resist. When Dr. Wang first joined the clinic, nobody could have guessed how much his presence would alter the atmosphere of that place. At first glance, he was like any other young dentist, polite, diligent, and unassuming. He blended in easily with the other staff, sharing meals with them after long shifts, and even contributing jokes during late-night cleanups. But there was something else about him, something that didn't fully reveal itself until later. He carried an invisible weight, the kind that people who grew up close to temples and rituals often bore without realizing it. Dr. Wang came from a family deeply rooted in spiritual traditions. His parents owned and managed a temple in the countryside, a place where incense never stopped burning and where villagers came to seek blessings, guidance, or protection from unseen forces. As a child, he had grown up surrounded by whispers of the supernatural. He had seen offerings left at roadside shrines, witnessed rituals to appease wandering spirits, and heard the solemn chants of monks late into the night. Unlike most people who brushed aside such stories as superstition, Dr. Wang had learned to treat them with quiet respect. To him, the spirit world wasn't an abstract concept. It was real, tangible, and dangerously close to our own. Perhaps that was why, almost from the beginning, he noticed something different about the clinic. To the other staff, the building felt ordinary, save for the occasional unsettling night shift. But Dr. Wang sensed something heavier lurking in its foundation. He described it later as a kind of suffocating thickness in the air, most pronounced in the basement, where Xiao and Ling saw a comfortable lounge with a sofa, a TV, and a statue of Guanyin. Dr. Wang felt an unseen pressure pressing against his chest, as though the walls themselves were breathing. Still, he tried to ignore it. He told himself that stress, long hours, and the strangeness of working in a new environment could explain the unease. He wasn't one to speak openly about ghosts, at least not until the night he could no longer dismiss what he experienced. It happened on a quiet afternoon when most of the staff had gone home early. Only Ling and Dr. Wang remained in the clinic. To pass the time between patients, he had brought his PlayStation console and set it up in the basement lounge. The flickering images of the game filled the room, and for a while, it felt like any normal day. He sat comfortably on the sofa, tapping at the controller, letting his mind sink into the rhythm of the game. But after an hour or so, fatigue crept in. His eyes grew heavy, and he leaned back against the cushions, just intending to rest for a minute. The moment he closed his eyes, he realized something was wrong. This wasn't ordinary drowsiness. His body felt as though it had been pinned down, each limb nailed into place. He tried to move his fingers, then his legs, but they refused to respond. Panic began to bloom in his chest. He wasn't fully asleep, and yet he wasn't awake either. He was suspended in that eerie liminal state where the mind is aware, but the body is trapped. Then he heard it. A voice. Ling's voice, calling from upstairs. "Dr. Wang, there's a patient here for you. Could you come up?" Her words were clear, almost casual, but something about them rang false. The tone was slightly too smooth, too deliberate, as though rehearsed. He tried to answer, to call back that he was coming, but no sound escaped his throat. His tongue felt like stone. Sweat gathered on his forehead as he realized he could do nothing but listen. And then came the sound that froze him entirely. A laugh. At first it was faint, like the echo of a child playing in the distance. But as the seconds dragged on, it grew louder and sharper. It wasn't a laugh of joy, but something twisted, mocking, as though someone were savoring his helplessness. The sound seemed to rise from the corner of the room near the television, where shadows flickered across the wall. Slowly, something began to emerge from those shadows. At first, it was just a vague outline, human-shaped but distorted, its limbs moving in jerky yet deliberate motions. The longer he watched, the more the figure solidified. It was a woman, or at least something wearing the mask of a woman. She moved in a slow, ritualistic dance, her arms bending at impossible angles, her hands twisting in stylized gestures that reminded him of traditional opera or Southeast Asian ritual performances. The movements were beautiful and grotesque all at once, carrying with them a sense of something ancient and forbidden. As she drew closer, her features sharpened, thick eyebrows arched unnaturally high above her eyes, painted on in the exaggerated style of Chinese or Thai opera performers. Her lips were smeared with crimson, curling upward into a smile that stretched too far, as though carved into her flesh. It was a smile that radiated cruelty, not warmth. From that painted mouth, the laughter spilled out again, looping and distorted, a sound no human throat should ever be able to produce. Dr. Wang's heart pounded as the woman glided nearer, her body bending with each dance-like step. The air grew colder. He felt it pressing against his skin, seeping into his bones. His body screamed to move, to escape, but he remained locked in place, forced to stare into the grotesque performance as it unfolded inches from his face. Then, without warning, a hand touched his shoulder. The world snapped back into motion. His body jolted upright, lungs dragging in a desperate gasp of air. He turned and saw Ling standing beside him, her face filled with confusion. "Dr. Wang," she said softly, "I've been calling you. The patient is waiting upstairs. Why were you just lying there with your eyes open?" His gaze darted back to the TV. The shadowy woman was gone. The basement looked perfectly ordinary again. The sofa, the table, the statue, all in their rightful places. For a moment, he thought he might have lost his mind, that exhaustion had conjured some elaborate hallucination. But the cold sweat clinging to his skin told him otherwise. He had seen something real, something that should not have been there. That night, shaken and unable to sleep, Dr. Wang called his father at the temple. He described everything: the paralysis, the mocking voice that mimicked Ling, the woman's grotesque smile, the way she danced like a spectre from some forgotten ritual. His father listened without interruption. Then, after a long silence, he said only this: "Wear the talisman I gave you. Do not take it off while you work in that clinic. It is your only shield." Dr. Wang obeyed. From the next day onward, the small charm of red thread and blessed script never left his neck. For a time, it seemed to help. The heaviness in the basement dulled, though it never fully disappeared. Still, the fear lingered in the back of his mind. He avoided the basement as much as possible, never lingering longer than necessary. But in the end, even the talisman was not enough to give him peace. Within weeks, he handed in his resignation. Officially, he told his colleagues that he had found a new opportunity closer to his parents' temple in the countryside. It wasn't uncommon for young dentists to move between clinics, but his sudden departure after only a short stint raised quiet suspicions. Xiao and Ling exchanged uneasy looks, remembering his story of the shadow woman, the laughter, and the talisman. For them, his resignation was confirmation of their worst fears. Jiayu, Wang hadn't left for convenience. He had fled. The clinic continued on without him, but his story left a shadow that lingered long after his departure. Every time Xiao descended the stairs into the basement lounge, she couldn't help but glance at the corners of the room, half expecting to see a painted smile lurking in the dark. And though Dr. Wang never returned, the memory of his trembling voice as he recounted the story would echo among the staff like a curse. For once, you've seen something like that, something that bridges the living world and the one beyond. It never truly lets you go. Xiao never thought that one small decision, bringing her dog to work, would become the turning point in her understanding of what haunted that clinic. By then, weeks had passed since Ling's terrifying night in the basement, and Dr. Wang's bizarre confession about seeing a shadow woman dancing in front of him. The atmosphere inside the clinic was tense, yet everyone tried to carry on as if nothing had changed. Patients still came in, procedures still happened, and the staff continued to smile as though everything was perfectly normal. But underneath, there was a current of unease, one that seemed to ripple stronger with each passing day. It was on one of those slow afternoons, when the schedule was lighter than usual, that Xiao decided to bring her puppy along. Her co-workers were thrilled by the idea. Who wouldn't want to play with a cheerful dog during breaks? They laughed at the thought of the puppy bringing some warmth and innocence into a space that had grown increasingly cold. The basement, once a place of casual relaxation, had become avoided by most staff members. Yet with a puppy bounding around, maybe it would feel different, less threatening, less oppressive. Xiao came prepared. She brought a few toys, a blanket, and even her small pet surveillance camera, the kind that could stream live footage to her phone. She placed the camera discreetly in a corner of the basement, facing the couch and the television. That way, while she worked upstairs at the reception desk, she could keep an eye on her dog, The arrangement was simple. The puppy would nap or play in the lounge, and the staff could take turns watching him when they had time between appointments. The day passed without incident. The dog was calm, tail wagging whenever someone came down to the lounge. No barking at empty corners, no sudden growls at unseen figures. It felt, strangely, normal. The clinic had not known that feeling in a long time. By the time Xiao packed up her things to go home, she was relieved. She almost believed that perhaps the energy in the basement had shifted, that maybe whatever had haunted them had finally dissipated. But later that night, Xiao realized she had left the pet camera in the basement. For a moment, she debated whether to return and fetch it. The thought of walking into the clinic after hours unsettled her, though. The building would be dark, the halls silent, and the basement, that basement, would be waiting. She decided it wasn't worth it. The clinic was locked, the camera safe where it was. She would collect it in the morning. Around 3 a.m, long after she had drifted into a shallow sleep, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She groggily reached for it, squinting at the bright screen. A notification from the pet camera app glowed back at her. Motion detected. Xiao frowned. Her mind, still foggy with sleep, tried to piece together the logic. The clinic was locked. The lights were off. There shouldn't be any movement at all. For a fleeting moment, she thought of the most mundane explanations. Perhaps the dog had somehow been left behind, or maybe a stray cat had found its way in. But no, she had carried her dog home with her, fast asleep in his bed by her side. Now, fully awake, her stomach tight with dread, Xiao tapped the notification and opened the live feed. The basement appeared on the screen, bathed in the eerie green wash of the night vision camera. The furniture was exactly as she remembered. The couch against the far wall, the coffee table cluttered with magazines, the television in the corner. Nothing looked disturbed, but then she noticed something odd. The TV was on. Its glow flickered faintly, casting shadows that wavered across the walls. Xiao's breath caught in her throat. She was sure the television had been switched off when she left. Even if someone had accidentally left it on, the power should not have been running in the middle of the night without anyone present. Her pulse quickened. She leaned closer to the screen, her eyes darting around the edges of the feed. And then she saw it. Movement, subtle at first, near the far corner of the room. It wasn't the jitter of a glitch or the static blur of bad reception. It was a figure. The shape moved with deliberate grace, each gesture flowing into the next like choreography. The figure swayed and turned, its arms bending at angles too precise to be random. Xiao's mouth went dry. The motions were dance-like, stylized, as though part of a ritual performance. Her heart hammered. She instinctively pinched the screen to zoom in, desperate to make sense of what she was seeing. As the image expanded, the figure slowed and turned. It looked directly at the camera. Xiao's whole body went rigid. The figure's face was faint in the grainy feed, but unmistakable. Dark, exaggerated brows arched high above eyes that glowed faintly in the night vision light. Lips painted thick and red curled into a smile that was far too wide, too stretched. It wasn't human, not truly. It was the same woman Dr. Wang had described. The grotesque, opera-like makeup, the unnatural grin. And now she was staring straight at Xiao through the lens, as though she knew she was being watched. Xiao nearly dropped her phone. Her breath came in shallow bursts. She wanted to close the app, to look away, but something rooted her in place. The figure stepped closer, filling more of the frame. Its movements were slow, deliberate, like a dancer pacing the stage. And then came the sound. At first it was faint, a low, distorted chuckle. Then it grew louder, repetitive, like broken laughter caught on a loop. The noise filled Xiao's ears through her phone speaker, chilling in its cadence. It wasn't joyful. It wasn't even mocking. It was hollow, as though the sound itself was decaying. Xiao's skin prickled. Every nerve screamed at her to stop watching. But before she could act, she noticed something else in the background. Shadows. They emerged along the walls, faint outlines of figures moving in unison. One after another, they began to appear, until the basement was filled with them. They swayed and turned in the same twisted ritualistic dance, their bodies flickering like candle flames in the dark. Their arms stretched unnaturally, their motions synchronized, as though performing for an unseen audience. Xiao's eyes widened in horror. There wasn't just one entity, there were many. The woman with the painted face continued her dance at the front, leading them, her smile fixed, as though carved into her skin. Behind her, the shadows multiplied, filling every corner of the room, their movements deliberate and grotesque. The basement, once a place for laughter and rest, had transformed into a theater of the damned. Xiao couldn't endure another second. With trembling fingers, she slammed her phone shut, the image disappearing into blackness. She dropped it onto her blanket and sat frozen in her bed, chest heaving, eyes wide in the dark. Sleep would not come again that night, not after what she had seen. But the image was already burned into her mind. The wide smile, the fixed gaze, the chorus of shadows dancing silently behind her. When morning finally broke, the world outside looked unchanged. The sun still rose, the city still hummed with life. But for Xiao, everything had shifted. She had seen the basement for what it truly was. Not a lounge, not a safe retreat for staff, but a vessel, a stage where restless spirits gathered. And the most terrifying thought of all was not what she had seen, but what it meant. Dr. Wang had described the woman weeks ago, before he resigned and disappeared. Ling had felt the dread, had heard noises, and smelled rot. Xiao herself had witnessed money moving as if by unseen hands. Now the camera, cold and mechanical, had recorded the truth with unblinking eyes. It wasn't just imagination, it wasn't paranoia. They weren't alone in that clinic. And whatever haunted the basement was growing stronger. The unease inside the clinic had been building for weeks, but it was on that particular afternoon when everything finally came spilling out into the open. Xiao had not planned to say anything, at least not in front of everyone. She had replayed the images on her phone again and again, unable to erase the figure that had stared straight into her camera with that grotesque painted smile. The memory clung to her like a film of smoke. It was Ling's pale face beside her, the way her friend's hands trembled, that pushed her to finally speak. The staff had gathered in the reception area after closing time, some still in their white coats, others already shrugging into jackets, eager to leave. Normally the chatter was easy, full of jokes or complaints about patients. That evening, however, the air was taut, full of unspoken tension. Everyone seemed to be waiting for something, a silence so heavy that Xiao's voice felt like a stone breaking the surface of still water. She began cautiously, recounting what had happened with Ling: the violent banging on the metal shutters, the basement lights plunging into darkness, the impossible stench of the dead rat that had appeared out of nowhere. She could feel eyes on her, some skeptical, some wide with recognition. Then she spoke of her own experience. The night when the clinic's lights had gone out, when the cash she had been counting had disappeared from her hands and reappeared, neatly stacked inside the locked safe. She explained, step by step, until finally she revealed what she had seen on the pet camera. The figure, the unnatural movements, the laughter that seemed to echo through the device as though the shadows themselves were mocking her. By the time she finished, her voice was shaking. For a moment, the room was silent again, but it was no longer the silence of doubt. It was the silence of people who were holding back their own confessions. Ling spoke first, her voice barely audible. She admitted that for weeks she'd been catching glimpses of movement out of the corner of her eye while working in the basement. Dark shapes that vanished the moment she turned her head. She had never told anyone, afraid of sounding foolish. But now, Xiao's story gave her the courage to say it aloud. One by one, others began to nod. A young dentist mentioned how he once felt a sudden coldness sweep over him as he sat on the basement couch. Another said she had seen, just for an instant, a figure standing near the altar by the TV, only for it to dissolve when she blinked. No one had dared to bring these things up before. They had all dismissed their experiences as fatigue, tricks of the light, the side effects of long shifts. But hearing each other speak, the coincidences piled up until denial was no longer possible. It was not only Xiao and Ling. They were not imagining it. Something was truly wrong with the clinic. Throughout this exchange, the owner had been listening. He stood slightly apart from the group, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He was usually the most talkative person in the room, often cracking jokes or reminding them of their sales numbers. That evening he said nothing. His silence was unnerving. When Xiao finished and the last nervous laugh faded, the owner turned without a word and walked toward the stairwell. His footsteps echoed sharply against the tiled floor as he descended into the basement. The group exchanged uneasy glances, whispers rising and then dying as quickly as they came. No one followed him. The basement door creaked open and then shut behind him. Minutes stretched out like hours. A low hum of the fluorescent lights filled the air upstairs, but no one dared move. Xiao imagined him standing in that dim lounge where so many of their strange encounters had taken place, where shadows seemed to gather in corners like water pooling on a cold stone floor. She imagined him staring at the small altar by the TV, the serene face of the thousand-hand Guanyin statue staring back with its many arms frozen in silent gestures. When he finally emerged, he was carrying something wrapped tightly in old newspapers. The shape was unmistakable, the curve of a figure, the outline of a statue. He clutched it close, as though afraid it might slip from his hands, and he did not look at anyone as he strode across the room. Without a word, he walked out the front doors, leaving the staff standing in stunned silence. For a few long moments, no one spoke. The door banged shut behind him, and all that remained was the sound of their own shallow breathing. Then, as suddenly as he had left, he returned. This time he carried a stack of red envelopes, the kind usually reserved for Lunar New Year or important family occasions. He went from person to person, pressing an envelope into each hand. His expression was tight, his lips a hard line. He offered no explanation, no lecture, not even a reassurance, only a quiet apology. "I'm sorry for the trouble." Xiao felt the weight of the envelope in her palm. She did not open it, but she knew what was inside. Lucky money, hush money, call it whatever one liked. It was the universal gesture of appeasement, but it was also an admission. The owner would not have gone to such lengths if nothing were wrong. The mood shifted again. What had been tension gave way to dread. If he had taken the statue away, if he had given them money to smooth things over, then he believed them. He knew. Perhaps he had known all along. No one asked him what he had taken from the basement. No one dared. But everyone thought the same thing. It had to be the Guanyin statue, the one that had sat on the altar for years, a silent witness to all their laughter, all their meals, and now, to their growing terror. Xiao could not shake the memory of the figure she had seen on her phone. Its lips curled into that grotesque smile. She wondered if removing the statue would remove the spirits too, if perhaps they would finally be free of whatever presence haunted their workplace. But deep inside, she doubted it. She remembered Dr. Wang's story, the way he had described the shadow woman dancing in the dark, her laughter filling the air. That kind of presence did not simply vanish because an object was carried away. Around her, the others clutched their red envelopes, their eyes fixed on the owner as he placed the last one into Ling's trembling hand. No one thanked him. No one spoke. The silence was so absolute that the faint hum of traffic outside seemed deafening. The owner looked around the room one last time, his gaze lingering not on their faces, but on the floor, as though he could not bear to meet their eyes. Then he straightened, cleared his throat, and said only, "Go home early. We'll close for the day." And that was it. No ritual, no prayer, no words of comfort, only a command. As the staff filed out of the clinic, their footsteps sounded unnaturally loud against the linoleum, echoing in the stillness of the nearly empty building. Xiao lingered at the door, her hand resting against the frame, staring back at the dim hallway that led to the basement. She had worked there for years, but that evening it felt alien, as if the shadows themselves were watching, holding their breath until the last human left. On the street outside, the group dispersed quickly, each person walking in a different direction as though afraid to be seen together. The envelopes burned in their pockets. Some clutched them tightly, others stuffed them away without a glance, but everyone felt the same unspoken weight. The city around them moved on as usual, traffic honking, neon signs flickering, scooters darting through narrow lanes. Yet to Xiao, everything looked different, darker. The knowledge that something beyond explanation had invaded their everyday world gnawed at her. The clinic was no longer a place of work. It was a place of haunting, a cage for something old and malevolent. That night, as she lay in bed, Xiao turned the unopened envelope over and over in her hands. She thought about the statue, about the shadows dancing in her camera feed, about the figure that had stared at her through the screen. She wondered if the money was meant to protect them or simply to buy their silence. And above all, She wondered whether whatever had been bound to that statue was truly gone, or if it was simply waiting, free now to wander where it pleased. Xiao and Ling had grown used to closing the clinic together. By now, the building that once felt warm and familiar had become a place of unease. The laughter that used to fill their breaks was gone, replaced by whispers, glances toward the basement, and unspoken fears that weighed heavily on their hearts. Both women tried their best to pretend nothing was wrong, but deep down, they knew the atmosphere of the clinic had changed forever. That evening, as the last patient left and the doors were locked, the two friends prepared to tidy up before heading home. The hallways were silent, except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Neither of them wanted to linger in the basement any longer than necessary, but their belongings, bags, shoes, and coats were still down there. Together, they forced themselves down the narrow stairwell. Their footsteps echoed, each creak and thud amplified in the stillness. The basement looked the same as always: the couch, the coffee table, the dim TV cabinet. Yet the atmosphere was suffocating, heavier than before. Xiao's eyes caught something unusual by the coat rack. Among the familiar jackets and uniforms, there was one dental coat that stood out. It was clean, pressed, but strangely out of place. As she stepped closer, her breath caught. Embroidered above the breast pocket was a name: Dr. Wang. He had resigned weeks ago. There was no reason for his coat to still be here. Xiao hesitated, her fingers brushing against the fabric. That was when she noticed something protruding from the pocket: a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, as if it had been carried for some time. Against her better judgment, she slipped it out and unfolded it. Her hands trembled as her eyes fell on the drawing. It was rough, hurried, yet unmistakable. A female figure stared back at her from the page, sketched from the waist up, clad in ornate traditional theatre attire, complete with the elaborate headdress and exaggerated makeup of Chinese opera or Thai performance art. The eyes were hollow, the lips painted thick and red, curling into a smile that stretched too far, and across the entire figure a bold X had been scrawled, jagged and violent, as if the artist had tried to erase her existence in frustration or fear. Xiao's chest tightened. She didn't need anyone to tell her who this was. It was the same figure Dr. Wang had described, the shadow woman who danced in the basement, who leaned close to his face while he lay paralyzed on the couch. For a moment, Xiao regretted even touching the sketch. The paper felt heavier than it should have, as though it carried the weight of something unseen. She folded it quickly and slipped it into her own pocket, but the unease stayed with her, pressing against her skin like a second heartbeat. Ling, standing nearby, noticed her pale face. "What is it?" she asked softly. "Nothing," Xiao muttered, unwilling to explain just yet. "Let's get our things and go." But before they could leave, Ling suddenly froze. She patted her pockets with a frustrated gasp. "My phone. I must have left it in the patient room upstairs. I'll run back and grab it." Xiao nodded, staying behind in the basement. The air felt even colder now. She tried to distract herself by slipping her shoes on quickly, but her ears strained toward the silence above. Moments later, a sound ripped through the quiet. A muffled cry, sharp and trembling. Xiao's heart lurched. She bolted up the stairs, nearly tripping on the steps, and rushed toward the patient room. There, just outside the door, Ling was crouched on the floor, her hands pressed against her face, her whole body shaking violently. Xiao dropped to her side. "What happened? What did you see?" Ling slowly lowered her hands, her eyes wide with terror, scanning the empty room beyond. Her voice cracked as she whispered. She was sitting there, in the chair. Xiao followed her gaze. The dental chair stood in the center of the room, perfectly still, the equipment neatly arranged, the surfaces gleaming under the clinical light. Nothing seemed out of place, but Ling's trembling finger pointed toward it, as if the image were burned into her mind. "She was lying back," Ling stammered, her mouth wide open like she was waiting for a procedure. But then she turned her head. She looked straight at me. She smiled. Her last word broke, dissolving into a sob. Xiao felt the chill crawl up her spine. She could almost imagine the scene. This grotesque woman with painted lips, stretched unnaturally wide, reclining like a patient in need of care. The thought of her sitting in that chair, waiting, staring, smiling. It was too much. Xiao's instinct screamed at her to run. Without hesitation, she darted into the room, snatched Ling's phone off the counter, and grabbed her friend by the arm. Together, they fled through the darkened corridors, not daring to look back. That night, neither of them could sleep. Xiao sent messages to the few dentists she trusted, sharing what had happened. The story spread quickly among the staff, and the response was unanimous. Everyone had already felt uneasy. Some had seen shadows in the corner of their eyes, and many had grown tired of pretending nothing was wrong. Now, with Ling's terrifying encounter, the fear reached its breaking point. "No more," one dentist replied. "I'm cancelling my appointments. I won't set foot in that place again." Another wrote, "We all know something is there. The boss can keep his promises, but our safety comes first." Within hours, schedules were cleared. Patients were cancelled. The clinic, once a lively and busy place, fell silent. What made it worse was the absence of the owner. For days, he had been unreachable. No replies to calls, no answers to messages. It was as if he had vanished along with the statue he carried away from the basement. The silence from him felt like betrayal, as though he had left them to fend for themselves against something none of them understood. Ling and Xiao, once proud to call the clinic a second home, now dreaded even passing by the building. The thought of returning, of walking down that stairwell or stepping into that patient room, was unbearable. They spoke of it in hushed tones, wondering if Dr. Wang had known more than he revealed. Perhaps his sudden resignation was not simply convenience but desperation. Perhaps he had realized that whatever haunted the basement was far more powerful than any talisman could ward off. For the rest of the staff, the decision was final. They would not go back until the owner himself provided answers. But answers were slow in coming, and the weight of dread only grew heavier with each passing day. The clinic, once filled with laughter, patience, and the hum of daily life, now seemed like a hollow shell, a place where shadows gathered and secrets lingered. To outsiders, it was just another dental office in Taipei. To those who worked within its walls, it had become something else entirely, a place claimed by forces beyond human control. And as for the figure, the painted woman who danced in the basement and smiled from the dental chair, No one could say where she had come from or what she wanted, only that she was there, waiting, watching, feeding on fear. By the time the owner resurfaced, looking thinner, exhausted, and haunted himself, the damage had already been done. His silence had broken the fragile trust of his employees. His absence had left them exposed to horrors they could no longer deny. The staff's bond was fractured, their courage drained. For Xiao and Ling, that night marked the point of no return. The discovery of Dr. Wang's coat, the cursed sketch, the woman in the chair, these were not coincidences. They were signs, warnings that whatever haunted the clinic was not just a passing shadow, but a force deeply rooted in rituals, far older, far darker than they had ever imagined. From that moment forward, the clinic was no longer just a workplace. It was a threshold, a liminal space between the living and the dead, a stage where unseen forces demanded attention. And no one, not even the bravest among them, wanted to be part of it anymore. The climax had come, and with it, the certainty that their lives would never again return to the ordinary rhythm of friendly banter and quiet shifts. Something had been awakened, and there was no turning back. The staff had gathered in the clinic, their faces tense, their voices hushed. For days, fear had been spreading quietly among them like a contagion. They had seen too much, felt too much, to continue pretending that everything was normal. The unspoken question lingered in the stale air. What was happening inside this clinic? It was the owner who finally broke the silence. He looked exhausted, the weight of sleepless nights etched into the hollows of his cheeks, his eyes darkened with shadows. He stood before his employees, not as the confident man they had once admired, but as someone cornered by his own choices, forced to reveal the secrets he had long buried. He began not with ghosts, but with his story, his ambition. Years ago, he said, he had started from nothing. No money, no connections, nothing but his skills as a dentist and a relentless drive to succeed. He had worked tirelessly, day and night, to build his first small clinic. The hours were brutal, the sacrifices heavy, yet through sheer determination, he managed to survive in the fiercely competitive city of Taipei. As the years passed, success came. Slowly at first, then in larger strides. His clinic grew a loyal base of patients. Money began to flow in, and he reinvested every bit of it back into his business. Soon, one clinic became two became several. His network expanded across the city. By all appearances, he was living the dream, a self-made man who had clawed his way up from obscurity into wealth and recognition. But success, he admitted, has a strange way of infecting the heart. Once you taste it, you begin to crave more. Enough is never truly enough. And so, on one of his business trips to Thailand, trips his staff had always assumed were routine, harmless ventures, he encountered something that promised to push his ambitions even further. It happened during a dinner with a wealthy acquaintance. Between drinks and casual conversation, the acquaintance leaned closer and whispered about a certain Ajahn, a spiritual master, a shaman of sorts, who could open doors that money and strategy never could. This shaman, he claimed, had helped others amass fortune, influence, and power beyond imagination. The method, however, was not something ordinary people dared to speak about. It was whispered, veiled in taboo. Intrigued, the owner sought the man out. The shaman lived far from the bustling streets, in a dimly lit house that smelled of incense and old wood. There, he explained to the owner a practice that was as ancient as it was forbidden. In Cantonese, it was known as Yung Guai Zai, literally raising little ghosts. It was black magic, a pact between the living and the dead, a ritual where spirits were summoned, bound, and then nourished with offerings. In exchange, they would bring wealth, prosperity, protection, or vengeance, if commanded. The owner hesitated at first. He was a man of science after all, a dentist by training. But ambition is a powerful seducer. The thought of multiplying his success without the grinding struggle, without the endless race against competitors, was too tempting to resist. The shaman assured him it was simple. As long as he maintained the pact, kept up the offerings, and respected the spirits, they would serve him faithfully. So, under flickering candlelight and the drone of ancient chants, the ritual was performed. Offerings of food, incense, and blood were made. An object was chosen to serve as the vessel, the anchor for the spirits. In this case, it was the thousand-armed Guanyin statue that later sat in the basement of the clinic. And at first, it worked. Business soared. Appointments overflowed. The clinic expanded rapidly. Money poured in with a momentum that felt unstoppable. The owner basked in his newfound success, convinced he had found the ultimate shortcut to power. But shortcuts always come with a price. The shaman, of course, demanded continued payment. Each visit, the fees grew higher. Each year, the rituals became more elaborate, the offerings more costly. The owner began to resent it. After all, wasn't it his effort that had built the clinics? Weren't the patients coming for his skill, his reputation? He told himself he no longer needed the shaman, nor the rituals. His business was thriving on its own. Why keep feeding the spirits? Why keep throwing money at a man who thrived on fear and superstition? And so he broke the pact. He stopped the offerings. He severed ties with the shaman. He left the statue in the basement of the clinic, treating it as nothing more than decoration. For a while, nothing happened. Life went on as usual. He convinced himself he had been foolish to believe in such things. Perhaps it was coincidence all along. Perhaps the spirits were nothing but stories. But spirits do not forgive neglect. It began with small things: arguments at home, financial mishaps, strange accidents. Then came the nightmares. Night after night, he woke drenched in sweat, haunted by visions of shadowy figures dancing, their faces grotesque masks of painted smiles and hollow eyes. The dreams bled into waking life. In the clinic basement, staff began to hear footsteps, see flickers of movement. The air itself seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on anyone who lingered too long. The statue, once thought to be benign, had become the heart of it all. It was not simply a decoration, but a vessel, a container for the spirits that had been summoned. Without the rituals to keep them fed and controlled, they began to turn restless. Worse still, they began to feed on each other. The owner explained that in such practices, multiple spirits are often bound together. When neglected, the weaker ones are devoured by the stronger, until only the most malevolent remains. By the time he realized the danger, it was too late. He had gone back to the shaman in desperation, carrying the Guanyin statue wrapped in cloth, begging for help. But the shaman only shook his head. The balance had been broken. The spirits had already fused into something darker, something far stronger than either of them could control. The owner's voice faltered as he confessed all of this. The room was silent, the staff listening in horror. Some exchanged nervous glances, others clutched at their sleeves or shifted uncomfortably, as though afraid that even hearing the story might attract attention from the other side. He tried to reassure them, speaking of renovations, of new beginnings, of bigger plans for the future, but his words rang hollow. Everyone could see the truth in his gaunt face and trembling hands. The man was unraveling. His empire of clinics, once symbols of his triumph, had become cages of his own making. The consequences soon spread beyond the clinic walls. His wife left him, unable to bear the constant arguments and the creeping dread that seemed to seep into their home. His son severed all contact. His health began to fail, mysterious ailments that no doctor could fully explain. One by one, several of his clinics shut down, bleeding money until bankruptcy loomed like a shadow over everything he had built. The man who once stood as a testament to hard work and ambition was now a broken figure, consumed by the very forces he had invited into his life. For Xiao and Ling, hearing his confession was both a revelation and a confirmation of their deepest fears. The strange events, the apparitions, the suffocating dread, they were not accidents, not coincidences. They were the price of a bargain made in greed and broken in arrogance. And as the owner's voice trailed off, the staff realized something chilling. The story was not finished. The statue might have been removed. The pact might have been broken. But spirits do not vanish so easily. Once invited, they do not simply leave. The clinic was no longer just a workplace. It was a haunted vessel of ambition and regret, and everyone in that room knew it. In the end, the story of the clinic's owner serves as a chilling reminder of what happens when human ambition pushes into places it should never go. In his hunger for wealth and status, he opened a door that was never meant to be touched. And through that doorway came a darkness that stripped him of everything he once held dear: his family, his health, his fortune, and even his peace of mind. What began as a shortcut to success unraveled into a curse that consumed his entire life. But it leaves us with unsettling questions. Was this the hand of karma, balancing the scales against greed? Was it the natural consequence of breaking an ancient pact? Or perhaps it was the shaman's curse, deliberately unleashed to punish him for refusing to pay? In stories like these, the lines blur between belief and consequence, between superstition and truth. Across many parts of Asia, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Thailand, Malaysia, there are whispered tales of raising ghosts, known as Yang Xiao Gui. It is said to be one of the darkest practices, binding restless spirits to bring fortune or protection. Yet what is gained in shadows always demands repayment. As the old saying goes, it is easy to invite spirits, but hard to send them away. Power born from such rituals is never free. It is borrowed, and eventually the debt comes due. If this story left you haunted, curious, or even questioning, then you're in the right place. Stay with this channel for more tales of the supernatural, mysteries hidden in Asia's cultural traditions, and the eerie legends that still linger today. Subscribe, share, and join me next time, if you dare, for another journey into the unknown.